most often when people talk about trying to find funding for their work, they focus on these three areas: entrepreneurship, consulting, and research. So our panel has one person from each of these areas, and some of the persons you'll see overlap. They are both entrepreneurs and consultants, or entrepreneurs, consultants, and researchers. So first up, I have Chaiwe Mushauko, who is the CEO of CADEV. And then I have Sylvia Nyaga, who is a social innovation entrepreneur. And then I have Kwabena Nyarko, who is a professor in the Department of Civil Engineering of the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi. So Sylvia, can you please introduce yourself a little bit more?
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Sylvia Nyaga. I'm a water and environmental engineer, as well as a social entrepreneur. I run Sina, which is a social enterprise that's focused on providing inclusive water and sanitation solutions, paying focus on the needs of people with disabilities and elderly people in rural Africa. Really excited to share about my experiences in funding. Thank you.
Fantastic. And Chaiwe, can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Elaine. It's a pleasure to be here and appreciative of all these participants from across the globe, I believe. My name is Chaiwe Mushauko. I'm coming out of Lusaka, Zambia, and I'm a social entrepreneur stroke consultant. I've been in this space for a little bit over 4 years now. And I set up CADEV capacity development, and what we focus on mainly is innovative approaches in the nexus sectors, so WASH, agribusiness, climate change, and public health. And so we offer innovative solutions in that regard. But on the other side, we also support a lot of programming, a lot of evaluations, assessments, in the consulting space from within the institution CADEV. It's a pleasure once again to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chaiwe. And last but not least, Professor Kwabena, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Aline. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kwabena Nyarko, professor at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. I'm with the Civil Engineering Department, where I focus on WASH. Specifically, I teach water transport and distribution. I also look at rural small towns water supply, as well as sanitation. And then I also carry out research in the same areas. And I'm excited to be part of this panel.
Fantastic. So we have voices from Zambia, from Kenya, and from Ghana here with us today. So I would like to go straight to the questions now to make the most of our time. So maybe I'll start with you, Chaiwe. I'd like to ask you, why did you decide to do both entrepreneurship and consulting? And I know you have worked both nationally and internationally. Do you have any tips for moving into the international space on either entrepreneurship or consulting?
Thank you, Elaine, for that question. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and it really is more or less subjective. Different strokes for different folks, they say. So when I started out in consulting, I think early in my career after transitioning from having worked with an organization, so to segue into this space, into this self-employed space, I started out with consultancy, and consulting was basically on an individual level. So I was an individual consultant or an independent consultant. And then when I set up the organization, CADEV, things changed a little bit. So it wasn't individual consultancy that I focused on. It was creating a business case for consultancy. So in most cases, I mean, we're very familiar with the sector in Africa, in Zambia, even more so. You don't see a lot of consulting firms, and consultancies are businesses in themselves. So we at CADEV decided to embrace this consulting opportunity from a business point of view. And that's why we are, multifaceted in our approaches. So that consulting side of it has really supported our efforts in providing services that are normally lacking at local level in Zambia, because for the most part, these services were outsourced to foreign organizations. So we saw that niche and we jumped into it. And then on the other side, we felt innovation was also one big gap. So our entrepreneurship pursuits really looked at how do we fill the gap in innovation in Zambia and across the region. And so we've been piloting a lot of these projects and products that fill the gap, things like sanitation, fecal sludge, solid reuse, for example, producing fertilizers from waste, as well as rolling out technologies such as pit empty technologies. So we've really been doing it all, so to say. So yes, so we augment these two approaches into one, and it works for us. And then that said, looking at the international development space, yes, I think that has been quite a mammoth task. I think, trying to get into other contexts like the Western context, it's not the easiest thing, but it's necessary. And the reason behind that is the sector is a very global sector. And so having eyes in those international places is very important, especially if you're running a business, because you need as much clientele, and clientele comes from everywhere, really. So that's what allowed us to jump into that space.
Okay, fantastic. Sylvia, if I can move on to you now. You are also a consultant and an entrepreneur. What do you find needs a different approach when it comes to getting funding as an entrepreneur versus as a consultant? And do you think your answer is differently depending on where in Africa you are?
Okay, thank you. I'll start by saying I don't think it's different depending on where you are. We have a lot of similarities in the different African countries. And then the approach for the two is different, because if you were just to fund a business, businesses are funded based on their business model, their scalability, their impact potential, right? Whereas a consultancy is basically a service, and you're not given the money based on the business potential and how fast you can grow. And actually, when I founded Signa, we used to go as Signa Consultancy. And I learned very quickly that it's a bit more challenging to get funding just as a consultant. In fact, we had one of our partners, they didn't fund us, we did a program with them. And as we were catching up, we told them about some of the solutions that we have in market. And they were like, oh, I thought you're just a consultant. That's why we've actually never approached you for funding. And I was like, no, we do more than just consultancy. And so we changed our branding from Signa Consultancy, and now it's just Signa. The people who still call us Signa Consultancy, people who've known us for a while, but now we just go as Signa. And reason is, one, the funding is mostly for enterprises. And so the approach that we take, we decided that we'll combine both consultancy and the solutions. Same thing as Chaiwe has said, she's talked about the consultancy bit of it and some of the solutions that they have in the market and that they pilot. So that's the same approach we took, because we realized just as a consultancy, it's really hard to have anyone fund your work. And so in our funding, so it means that the funding that we get covers the consultancy. So if we need to go and do things like needs assessments, if we need to do identify the infrastructure gaps in the counties, if we need to do feasibility studies. But then now the thing is, once we do the studies and the assessments and we come up with the solution recommendations, we then also implement the solutions, right? And so if we didn't have the part of us implementing the solutions and piloting these projects, it would be really hard for us to be able to get the funding. And so I would say for anyone who is getting money or trying to raise funds as a consultant, if you do not want to implement, that's fine, but then that's where collaboration comes in and partnerships. Find someone who is ready to implement the solution and then form a consortium, and you can put out your proposals where one party does the consultancy bit of it and then the other party does the implementation of the project. Then it becomes really easy for you to get funding. Otherwise, as a consultant alone, it's very hard, unless Chaiwe has a different opinion. But from experience, it's very hard just to get consulting funding alone.
Okay, very good. Very good to understand these differences on the spaces of consulting and entrepreneurship. So now let me bring to the research side of things. So Professor Kwabena, I know a lot of researchers struggle to fund their research as well. So what advice would you give to them? Do you think there is anything on your answer that is also location dependent in Africa?
Thank you, Aline. I think for research, we usually carry out research to address a problem. And the main outputs could be the publication, which will be disseminated. And then we pray that once the new knowledge is used, we get the outcomes that we are looking for. So to get funding, I think the first thing we need to do is to share our publications or disseminate with the potential users. That is the first step. I am a Ghanaian. I work in Ghana. So being a lecturer, a researcher in our university, anytime I come up with a publication, I try and share with the potential users. And you can go a step further by letting them know that we are ready to come and give a presentation so that they know how they can use it to improve either their processes or their work. At least that will let them know that something is happening and it has benefits. That's the starting point. And I can tell you that if you start with that, with time, you get requests. Can you help us in this particular way? Or can we see you to know how your research findings can be used to improve our work? So I would say that is the first step. The second step is to put your ideas together in the form of a proposal. So you can respond to calls or you can submit unsolicited proposals. Unsolicited proposals may take a bit of time, but once you submit, wherever you are taking it to, once your work aligns with what they are doing, it increases your chances of success. I did mention sharing your publications. There are also platforms, conferences, where you go, you meet people, and they get to know what you are doing. In countries where we don't have a lot of research funding, once you attend conferences, you meet people in the same area. If there's any international call, then the likelihood is that they'll get in touch with you, that we are putting this proposal together. Are you interested? Can we work with you? Then you'll be part of a consortium. So these are the main ways we can attract funding. First, potential users need to know that we are doing something that is of benefit, and then we can make our proposals ready to respond to calls and also submit unsolicited proposals. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm seeing a thread here, the importance of having partnerships and collaborations with key people in the sector that can then help you fill some of these gaps. So now I wanted us to move into a next segment. So we collected from the audience a number of questions during the registration phase. So we would like to open up a poll with the top questions we got from the audience. So audience, get ready. This is your time to engage. Please vote on which of the questions listed here you would like to receive the answer. What is your top question that you really want to get the answer out of this session? So the first one, how to find grants and technical support to create social enterprise business models, how to strategically bring more women into this space, how could someone set up a financially viable sanitation project? What are the key factors or timings to consider when it comes to looking for funding? And is there stability in doing consultancy as a job? What are the factors you should consider if you're interested in doing consulting? Any drawbacks? So I'll give you a few more seconds to respond. We have quite a bit of a tie between a few questions. And I see already questions are coming up on the chat box. Please remember to put the hashtag speaker queue so that we know that this question is addressed to a speaker. And please be prepared as well if you have more questions that have come up from this initial discussion that we had with our panelists. Feel free to put them on the chat box with the hashtag speaker queue, and we'll get to these questions also in a few minutes. So I'd like to end now our poll and share the results. So from the results, the top question is how to find grants and technical support to create social enterprise business models. So shall I start first with Sylvia for this question? What is your suggestion and tips on finding grants and technical supports to create social enterprise business models? And then Chaiwe, if you would like to add as well, you can follow from Sylvia.
Okay, thank you for the question. So first of all, you have to understand what stage you're at as a social enterprise because, well, there's so many opportunities out there. A lot of opportunities are very focused on people either in like different stages, right? So if you're in ideation stage, you need to look at programs that support people in ideation stage. And for that, you'd find things like pitching competitions, some incubators support people still in the ideation stage. And then if you move to the next stage, maybe you've already tested your product and you're very early on, you have a bit of traction, you have a bit of feedback. There are also programs specifically set for people in that stage. If you've grown and now you're expanding, then there are specific programs tailored towards that. So first of all, understand what stage you're at, what you're looking for you to be able to be aligned with the right opportunities. And then you can follow groups such as Opportunities for Africans. They post a lot of funding opportunities. And then there are also institutions that will offer now things like just technical support without the funding, right? And it depends, again, it really depends on where you are at. Personally, for me, I feel like when I was beginning, I did a lot of like trainings. And then now, right now, if you send me a training opportunity, I'll just be like, no, I'm not doing this because we've done so much of the training. So just know where you're at. And then when you go for events, know what events are happening in your sector, know what conferences are happening, go network, talk to people about what you do. And then that way, then they'll be able to tell you what opportunities are there because some of these opportunities are not advertised. Some actually are based on things like nominations. So expand your networks, post on LinkedIn, say you're looking for opportunities. Yeah, but put yourself out there as much as possible and network as much as possible and know exactly what your ask is for you to be able to find the opportunities.
Okay, very good. Clarity on your ask and on your stage of development. Chaiwe, would you like to add to this question?
Yes, Elaine, thank you. Unfortunately, my internet dropped for a second there, so you may need to just read the question out again so that I don't miss anything in my response, if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem. How to find grants and technical support to create social enterprise business models? So as you run also a social enterprise, what is your advice and tips for that?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that's a very important question. And, Sylvia has mentioned quite a little bit on, where you are in the business and what is available to you. But I think one thing to note is that, first of all, things are changing. So we have a very shifting finance environment or funding environment currently. And one of the things to really consider when you're starting out is to look out for what is out there. What are the trends? I think it's very important to understand the trends. And then when you do have a good understanding of the trends, then you'll be able to see where you really fit, because there are several layers of opportunities that allow you to access grants or TA. And this is at a very different level. So you have your national level, there are things going on there. You have your international level, you have your global level, so it depends on where you want to tap in. But you're also looking at things like what are the organizations that are available for you? Where are is it donors that you're looking at? Is it government funding? Is it foundations that you want to tap into? Is it private sector? Are they private investors? So there's a huge list of potential funders out there. But then, while you're doing that, you will realize that, in each of those opportunities lies different approaches, different interests. So it also depends on what you want to sign up for. For example, if you're looking at private investment, that does not mean that you're getting free money. You need to pay some of that back if you're a business, and you need to be a viable business. So there's definitely a lot of considerations that will allow you to decide which funding approach works for you. But I think the biggest piece of advice that I can provide is really studying, understanding the funding dynamics that exist before you. And then that will allow you to shape better your business or your enterprise. That said, I think maybe let me drill down a little bit. These days, we're looking at the wash sector, and we're not looking at the wash sector alone. You will find a lot of funding opportunities in the climate change conversation that speak to wash. You'll find that in the carbon offset conversation. You'll find it in gender. You'll find it in sustainable development. So you also have to have eyes in different sectors as well, and see where the nexus approaches that will allow me to tap into funding. That said, it's always good to not always look out, by the way. It's always important as well, as you run a business, to look internally. So one of the things we did at CADEV when we set up is we said, hey, if we don't find the funding, how are we going to be self-financed? How is this business going to drive itself? Because it is a business. So we have internally also designed, understood better where our money comes from and where we're going to put it for it to generate more revenue. And for us, really, that's the whole essence of what CADEV is. It's the sustainability aspects that allow the business like ours to run even without that external support. Yeah, I think that's all from me on that one.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chaiwe. Because of time, let me move to the second most voted question. So how could someone set up a financially viable sanitation project? So I think this one also speaks to the experience of both of you. So Sylvia, you want to get started, or Chaiwe?
Yeah, and it's okay. I can get started. So there's a famous quote by Einstein that says, where he's quoted saying, if he had an hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes focusing on the problem and 5 minutes focusing on the solution. And so I would say step number one is, first of all, understand the problem that you're solving. Is there a problem? Is it even a problem, or is it just a problem to you? So understand the problem, understand who is affected by the problem. And so basically your target market. And then from there, the second step I would say is test, fail, iterate, because it's very hard for you to implement something on the first try and it works. There's actually a study that says most of the successful companies have done 50 iterations for them to find the solution that's now been able to scale and grow. So keep on testing, especially in the sanitation space. For a long time, it's been seen as a service that should be rendered for free. It's not something that people want to pay for. There are factors such as cultural practices, so it's not as easy as selling anything else. And so I would say the second thing is just test as many times as possible, test with your users, put your users at the center of it, because for it to be sustainable, it means that they need to pay for it. It means that there needs to be continuous operation of the solutions that you're implementing. So make sure the people are at the center and keep testing. Don't give up. Sometimes it's very easy for you to feel like this is not working. If that's not working, then something has to work, because as long as the problem is there and it needs to be solved, there's a way to solve it. So just keep testing until you find a model that works and that people are willing to pay for.
Fantastic. Understanding very well your problem, understanding your market, and that the problem really addresses a need on the market. So Chaiwe, do you want to add some sense to this?
Yes, happy to. I think, building on from what Sylvia has shared, one of the things to consider is where you are and what the enabling environment is for that business. I think, when we look at some of the biggest enterprises in the sector, like where we get our SATO pans, those are model organizations that have done quite well in the sanitation space. We have Cola, who does sanitation facilities as well globally. So, you look at them and you say, okay, so what created that enabling environment for them? And you bring it down to the local level. And so besides looking at the market, you're also looking at, what is allowed for you to do in that market. So you look at the policy and regulation environment, for wash businesses. Are you able to register a business in wash? Is your country or your context able to allow you to provide a service in sanitation? Or is it solely a responsibility of a public sector institution? So you have to really benchmark where those limitations are. And then once you've had an understanding and you have a green light, then you're free to set up your business. But then beyond that, you're also looking at, the same things that we've spoken about. What are the funding opportunities? What's the market potential? What happens in terms of the marketing aspect? Because sometimes you do set up the business, but there's no off-takers or there are no buyers in that space. Or rather, there's more work and effort that you need to put in to grow the intervention so that your market understands what you're offering. And so there's that marketing side. And sometimes as a small business or a growing business, you may not have the resources to market. That may be somebody else's responsibility. Or rather, it may require a lot more resources than you're investing in the business. So you have to really look at all those enabling environments and the environment you're trading in, more or less.
Okay,
thank you.
Fantastic. I would like to move now to Kwabena. First, if you want to add to any of these two questions that were addressed first, feel free to do so. But I've got also a live question from Elizabeth Nungu. How can one position themselves for academic research funding on WASH? So feel free to share your insights on this positioning and also add to the questions that were previously asked.
Thank you. Positioning in academic research. I assume the person is a faculty member that's in a university elsewhere. Some of the research may not be very expensive. As an academic, once we have students, undergraduate and postgraduate, and they are supposed to carry out their research, that will be the starting point. With little or no funding, some research can be carried out. And once you carry out the research and we're able to share with the immediate beneficiaries, for example, I'm in Ghana, you can share research findings on sanitation with the municipality since they have a role to play. And you can even ask them for support. Let me give an example. We organized a field trip to an oil mill, and faculty members and students visited the oil mills. When they came back, they had about 20 or so research questions. They were generating a lot of ash. And one of the faculty members came to me. We want money to characterize the ash. The ash has so many uses, but you first need to characterize for farming, for producing cement, soil improvement, etc. And I said, okay, tell me direct costs, what you need so that you can characterize it in our labs. I think the bill I got was probably $1,500. And I said, let's write to the company. So we wrote to the company that this is what we need to characterize the ash. We want you to pay for it. And they paid. After the analysis, they went back to the factory, presented it to them, and said, look, you can use it for these products, 1, 2, 3, even for road construction. So That is where we got to. So as the oil company, Jabin Oil Mills, they have a big plantation of palm, and they also buy more and they process it into vegetable oil. And in fact, they even generate their own electricity there, and they produce a lot of the ash. So the first point of call was to share the results with them and says, are you interested in another line of business using the ash into a product? This was low-hanging fruits, about $1,500, and they were able to carry out the research. So long as you have a good idea, I promise you there's a lot of money. All they are looking for is good ideas. So you start in a small way, and before you be funded for research, they want to know that you are capable of doing what you are proposing. So they want to find out other research work that you've carried out. And once they see the potential, you are likely to be funded. And where we are in this part of the world, some of the research is not that as expensive as other places. Research is research. In Africa, in some of the countries, if you look at the GDP, salary rates, etc., you can carry out good research so long as you have the equipment, and the cost will come down because personnel cost is not as high as other places. So that alone is a good advantage for us. And you can even look at how much we pay for training, our tuition fees, etc., undergraduate, postgraduate, compared to other countries. So we have an advantage if we want to carry out research. Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. It's just a pity that indeed most of our governments have very limited budgets for research and development. So we really need to get creative to get some of this funding. But I really appreciate you mentioning the connection with the private sector. So I think the fact that you had this line of communication open between the university and the company helped facilitate this process. So I think for other countries or people from other countries that are joining us today, please make sure to have these lines of communication between the research institution and the private sector and other development partners. So continuing with our questions, another question that is coming up.
And Aline, if I can.
Yes, Kwabena, go ahead.
Aline, if I can add on, our governments don't fund research, but you can still submit unsolicited proposal, explain to them, because some of the things they do, which they call consulting, and they can even fall on foreign companies, are actually research that can be carried out locally at far lower costs compared to what you pay for consultants who come in and go. Once you have a good idea and you talk to them, it may take time, but once you engage, you certainly get the opportunity to contribute in that space. Yes.
Fantastic. So identifying these opportunities that come under the blanket of consultancy. So moving again into the questions that we got from the audience. So how can enabling conditions for WASH entrepreneurship be improved throughout Africa? Do some countries or regions have good models to follow? So here I will ask to all of the panelists to please weigh in. So reflecting on the landscape in Africa, what do you think can be improved in terms of enabling conditions? Chaiwe, I saw you nodding. You want to get us started?
Yeah, I actually like that question a lot. I think, as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to really understanding this enabling environment, I think the critical thing is our own understanding, and that's why this question is very important. I think we should really dwell on it. If there is research, publications, resources, I think those should be made available because it's important for us to understand what this really means. Particularly because, when you look at the entrepreneurship space in WASH, I think it's still a very new space on the continent. There's not a lot of businesses growing out of the sector, but we're progressively getting there. So we'll see in the next couple of years more businesses coming up, and so those questions will be very, very critical. But I think I'll answer this from a very personal level. You know, so much as I talked about enabling environment at a national level with policies and the like, I think there's also a bigger conversation on enabling environment when we look at issues to do with our own economies, you know. How are we funded in the sector? You know, the way that our sectors are funded. If you look at WASH, I think they're one of the most underfunded sectors at national levels. When you also look at the market potential, you're looking at very vulnerable buyers. You know, they don't have the money in their pocket. So it's a very difficult space for entrepreneurs. But at the same time, it's probably the most sustainable approach that we can do to improve the sector. Because when you offer a service, you know that based on how available that service is, it becomes a bit cheaper. So ultimately, my understanding is we definitely need to see more businesses coming up because that will make the service cheaper and more affordable for locals. But then we also have to know that that enabling environment for funding to get there, to get to a point where you have many businesses in the sector and sanitation sector, is looking at our economies and saying, okay, wait a minute, I think, you know, we have to improve certain things as well. It's a symbiotic relationship. We have to improve our own market potential because when you look at the market value that we have very small economies, even though we're talking about the most vulnerable.
Chaiwe?
Funding and finance. Sorry about that. I think my network dropped a little bit. So just to finish that point, what I'm basically trying to say is there is a lot of room in Africa to grow this space financially, and there's a need for more dedicated funding into the space. But we have a lot of constraints in our environment because of that space we're in. Basically, what it is and the biggest challenge is that our economies are just too small. So when you look at the larger economies, they're able to grow businesses to such a scale because they've got way more resources and way more of an enabling environment to fund and fuel and support those enterprises that we don't really have as much here in Africa. So it takes a bigger decision. It takes really these different layers, these multi-sector organizations, these governments to come up and say, how do we grow this sector from a business point of view? And then when that happens at that very high level, then and only then will we see real growth in the entrepreneurship space in the WASH sector in Africa. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chaiwe. Sylvia or Kwabena, would you like to add?
Yes, I would like to come in.
Yes,
I think I agree with Chaiwe that this is the only sustainable way. The second point I want to make is that we have to be intentional to create the enabling environment. We just have to be intentional, and it will require commitment from the highest level. If you look at the numbers, those without access to sanitation and water, that market is big, it is growing. And we know government cannot do it alone. And we also know that if it costs government $100 to serve, let's say, even 1,000 people, these enterprises can do it for, say, 50 or 60. So we need to be intentional, we need commitment, and then we need to provide some incentives. We need to provide some incentives to help the enterprises to deliver. And once we have a lot of enterprises working, we then have a perfect market. Then regulation becomes easy. Once the market is working, then you don't even need a lot of regulation. So for me, if government needs $100 to serve one person, and the enterprises can do it for, say, $40, then government should be able to meet the entrepreneurs halfway, maybe making land available, maybe some tax incentives, but make sure it is done in a transparent manner and it is well regulated to remove barriers so that the market will work. And when the market is working, we get all the efficiency benefits that we want. So that is my 2 cents on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sylvia?
Yeah, so I agree with what has been said by Chaiwe and Kwabena, but I'll speak to a specific challenge that we experienced, and that was lack of technical expertise to make some of the solutions and the products that we have in the market. So it's very hard to find like people who have the skill to create sanitation solutions. And then now on top of sanitation, we're also working with people with disabilities. So even the inclusivity aspect of it was a bit hard to find. And so by the time we were finding that one person who could like create the product that we want, it took a lot of time. And so one of the things that could be done to make this better for other entrepreneurs, because I know other entrepreneurs are also going through the same challenge, is focus on capacity building, right? Like how do we capacity build the youth to be able to get the skills to develop the solutions and implement them? It's good to see that we are having more of that now. In Kenya, we even have schools that now have courses in sanitation, in water, that teach these skills. But then if we could have more people being encouraged to take these courses, if they could be shown how these courses and these skills could be put to use and how they could benefit from it, that would really go a long way in enabling us to be able to deploy as many solutions as possible and as fast as possible. And still, these are the same people who will be able to do the operations and maintenance to ensure that the solutions stay there long term. So for me, I just say capacity building is like one of the key things that need to be done.
Thank you. I'll squeeze in just one more quick question that came from the audience. And I think this is something that is very relatable. So I think Mwanza asked, so she has a degree already in the engineering field. How much impact does the title of a doctor have in terms of attaining funding, seeing that most academic publications tend to be very scientific for practically in poor society? So I think Kwabena, Professor Kwabena, this is a question more for the research angle.
Okay, in terms of the title doctor, basically it says you've gone through a certain training in research. You've carried out research for 3-4 years, and you have your PhD, and that is a requirement for academic work, to lecture and also carry out research and supervise other students to do that. Beyond that, the rest is what you are able to do. The title itself will not give you research funding, but that is the entry point, that is the starting point. If you want to be in the academic space, the academic work, if you want to do academic work, that means after your master's, you register for a PhD, spend 3 years, 4 years, carry out your research, you document it, and once it's okay, we call you a doctor, and then you can also teach other students to carry out research.
Yes. And as I ask you to do a final round of your key messages for audience in terms of advice on how to get funding on this space, maybe you can reflect as well, like also on this question of titles and research, because I know Chaiwe and Sylvia, you both mentioned as well that you do a lot of research, market research and other type of research, even without having the very academic training. So can you reflect a little bit on this and leave us your final thoughts for the audience on how to get funding for their research, consultancy, and entrepreneurship? We can start with Sylvia.
Sorry, so final remarks on how people can get
Final
funding.
remarks. And by the way, I saw very quickly on the chat, someone was asking who your funders are. So if you can mention that as well.
Okay, I'll start with that. So my funders I've had different funders depending on the level that I was at, right? So when I was starting, because I was still in school, my first funder was actually a center in my university that supports entrepreneurs And then from there, I did a lot of pitch competitions. So I went for pitch competitions and raised money from that. And then I had Young Water Solutions fund my pilot project when I was starting, and then did more pitches. I've had the Roddenberry Foundation supporting our work, and Transform, which is EY, Unilever, and the FCDO. So those are some of the funders we've worked with, but then they've also gone with like how we've been growing over the years. So my final remark would be, one, first of all, know when the funding cycles are. Like now between January and March is a very good period for you to apply for opportunities, but then also make sure you prepare, make sure you know who are the funders, scope out the funders, what do they want, what are they looking for, prepare. Do not wake up today and apply for a fund today. So just make sure that you're prepared, make sure that you also connected with some of the funders, because then that builds trust, right? So if I know Aline is a funder and maybe they open their funding in November and I know Aline, I can start a conversation with her and she gets to understand what we do before I actually apply. So building trust with your funders and donors is also really, really important and increases your chances of getting the funding.
Okay, fantastic. Chaiwe? Your
All right,
final
thank you.
thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll just build on what Sylvia has shared with respect to getting funding. I think one of the things that's worth noting is tapping into your network. So, you know, this workspace requires that you are well known, you have a reputation, you have a track record, you're able to deliver. So we found that has been very helpful. Sometimes and most times we've been approached, you know, people have just come to us and organizations have come to us and said, hey, can you do this, you know? So that has been definitely not a stroke of luck. I think it's really just that reputation that we built over time. So we've had, yes, I wouldn't, you know, I try to be careful not to say, you know, funders per se. I think we've really been offering a service and, you know, we're getting a fair share of payment based on the services we offer, because that's it. We are a business. So that's what we do. We offer that service and get paid for it. But we don't shy away from looking out for grants, because there's also the social side and we want to grow that. Once we grow that, then we're able to gain our revenue. So yes, there's also been a lot of interest from private sector investors, both locally, but we sort of favor the ones outside because they bring a lot more value for money. So we're also very selective. I mean, you don't just take everything. You have to be very, very selective because it means a lot to growing a business. So we're now at the point where we can choose, you know, so we're happy about that. Yeah, but we've had some really good turnarounds. I'm not mentioning names because I'm being careful not to call out anybody. You know, someone may go knocking on their door and I wouldn't want that. And they say, Kadeb said it or Chaiwe said it. So no, I can't say anything there. And then that said, I think there was a bit of a thought on the research. So yes, again, so on the research side, yes, we found that there's a lot of baseline assessments, evaluations, academic research, not so much, but you know, the sector is a research-driven sector. It thrives on information. So there, the consulting side has done extremely well in capturing those research opportunities. And yeah, and it didn't really need a master's. On my side, I have a master's, I don't have a PhD, but we have a pool of experts that we tap into. So when our clients want certain expertise, we're able to tap into that pool of experts to provide that expertise if they want it at PhD level, at grassroots level, you name it, but it really doesn't restrict what is possible. Yeah. All right, thank you. I think those are my last thoughts on that side of things. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chaiwe. Professor Kwabena, your final thoughts and advice?
Yes, my final thoughts, I want to put myself in a seat of a funder, because a lot of questions about funding. I think if I were to be a funder with a pot of money, certainly we have the money to give out to achieve a certain objective. So we're only interested in those who help us achieve our objectives. So if we also see it from that perspective, then we realize that it makes sense to engage our funders, get to know exactly what they want to achieve, And I can assure you that if your proposal aligns with their ultimate objective, you will get funded. And how do we align? We just have to learn from them. We just have to try and understand them, where they are coming from, where they want to go, because they really have objectives, clear ones. They know where they are going, and they need partners to work with. So once you have a good proposal, it will definitely be accepted. So that is my final word. In terms of funding, we've received funding from UNICEF, European Union, some of the philanthropists, Bill and Melinda Gates. We've received funding from the British government, Danida, Danish government, and American government until last month or so, where our project came to a halt. Yes. So these are some of the organized. Locally, we've received money from the government, ministries, municipalities, and even some of the NGOs who are active.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this. We are almost out of time, so I want to thank you once again, Sylvia, Chaiwe, and Kwabena, for sharing your insights with us.